All right, howdy everyone. So I'm going to try to show a few things if I can with this camera set up on a tripod, and we'll just see. I'll have to see how the video looks when I'm done, but I'm going to try to point out a few things that I've been dealing with the Baffles and the Snorkle, which is what I'm currently working on. So you can see, hopefully you can see that I've got the side baffle in place here. I've got the forward baffle, or the forward ramp they call it, I believe, in place here. Now these are just rough fit. They're rough fit enough that I can get the bottom and top cowling on completely, but they may not be exactly finished at the moment. There's going to be some more trimming that needs to be done. The most important thing is to make sure that they're shaped enough that you can get the top and bottom cowlings in place. The other thing to keep in mind is, as the written instructions will say, that this ramp has to be kind of in line with the opening of the bottom and top cowling, actually the bottom cowling. So there's a lot going on between fitting the baffles to the cowling and then fitting the snorkel to the baffles. So these are roughly where they need to be at the moment. So like I had showed at a previous video, I had made the wood and tape adapter to hold the snorkel down here in alignment with the injector. So part of that puck is inside the injector and part of it is inside the snorkel to hold it perfectly in alignment with the it's not an injector, what is that? The fuel servo. I think that's more accurate. So with that in place, if you can imagine, that now becomes like a pivot, right? So this whole snorkel can now pivot around this part here. So when you come back up to this side of the snorkel, this part of the snorkel is actually longer than it needs to be, right? So when you have your wood puck in place and you're rotating this along that puck, this is not going to be in the right orientation, let's just say left and right, okay? When I first put this on, this part of the snorkel was way over here. And you need room to get the filter inside the snorkel, but of course the filter also needs to sit somewhat centered in this ramp, or at least in a good position in relation to the opening of the cowling. So if you can imagine, if you start cutting this shorter, if you start taking material off of this, now this has to rotate up to take up that gap. So just as an extreme, if I were to cut this like 2.5, let's just say 2 inches down, in order to take that new edge up to this, I would have to rotate the whole assembly. By doing that, it brings this part of the snorkel in, right? If you could imagine that, if this is cut shorter and I rotate this, this is actually going to come up and in. So it moves this toward the center line. So that's what I did. Again, this ramp is basically in the right orientation as far as its angle. In relation to the cowling opening, this ramp is about correct. So I have an idea of where the snorkel needs to be in relation to the ramp. So I just looked around and made marks on the snorkel, and I would trim it, and then I would put it back on, rotate it so that it would touch the ramp, and then check it again. And if there were areas of the snorkel, the perimeter of the snorkel, if there were areas where it was not physically touching the ramp, I would trim it some more. While I was trimming, I was also taking the filter and trying to figure out where the filter needed to be. And I just kept trimming the snorkel, and as I would rotate it, as it would rotate up, it would kind of move inboard at the same time. And I was able to kind of walk it over a little bit and find a happy place where the filter looked like it would nest where it should in relation to the cowling opening. It would fit inside of the snorkel nicely, and it wouldn't interfere with anything. The problem is, as you rotate the snorkel, you're bringing it closer and closer to your starter, and I don't know if you can see it, but you're also bringing it closer and closer to the brackets that hold your alternator. Of course, there's all kinds of different engine combinations, so this might not be a problem. I've got more than enough space around the starter. I don't have a lot of room around the alternator, so I got to keep an eye on that. So this, as it sits right now, is pretty much the way it's going to be. I have to double check and make sure, but the instructions tell you that once you get this laid out, you're supposed to draw a line around the perimeter of the snorkel onto the ramp, and that's where you're going to cut your hole on the ramp itself. So you trace around the snorkel, and then you cut the hole in the ramp. And you're also supposed to start marking your holes down here where it connects to the fuel servo. But I'm not there yet, because another thing that you're supposed to do is once you get this cut so that it lays nicely with the ramp, you're supposed to come down, I think it says 3/8 of an inch, and cut it 3/8 of an inch short. And that's to make room for the brackets that need to go in here so that you can actually put the filter in and out. So that's going to be the next step. I'm going to verify that this is correct, and then I'm going to go ahead and start marking things and trimming them and putting holes in the ramp and things like that to start working on brackets. So just as a quick recap, get your plug made for the fuel servo and the snorkel. And like I showed you in the previous video, my puck had a step in it. Using tape to vary the diameter works really well, because the inlet for the fuel servo was a little bit smaller than the inlet for the snorkel. So my puck has a step in it. And that works really well. You can use the tape to alter the diameter. So my snorkel fits on there snug, but not so snug that I can't rotate it. It rotates really nice. Keep in mind that as you trim this, it's going to rotate up, which is going to close your gaps in here. And as it rotates up, it's ever so slightly going to work its way in toward the center line of the engine. And you can use that to your advantage. Also keep in mind you want the ramp to be roughly pretty close, I shouldn't say roughly, but pretty close to the angle that it's actually going to be sitting when everything is finished, because you're going to trim the snorkel to this. So as you trim the four sides of the snorkel, you got to trim that so that that surface matches the plane of the inlet ramp. So you need to have that ramp at the correct angle before you start trimming this. So that's where I am right now. I'm going to double check everything and do some more trimming and fitting, and we'll see how it goes. All right? Alrighty, I'll talk to you guys here in a little bit. Howdy everyone. So looking at the plans for the baffle, you'll see this piece here. And what happens is you have to trim this piece down, and this angle along with this piece here, they go up underneath the ramp to hold it in place. And I'll show you that here on the airplane. So like I said before, let me get up here. So now we're looking obviously on the ramp that I was just talking about with the snorkel. So here's the bottom cowling. And like I've talked about in the other videos, the ramp needs to mate with the inlet of the cowling in this area. you'll see that the cowling kind of runs uphill, right? So there's very little gap here, but there's a big gap here, right? I can stick my finger in here. And that's why you have to do that other bend. Let me go back to the other side. I don't want to get too far off subject here, but so here's that transitional bend, right? So that this line of the baffle will line up with the cowling inlet here. And since this runs uphill, the cowling opening runs uphill, you have to put this bend in it in the ramp to get this here to lay flat with the cowling. And I think I've shown that before. So here you can see, here's the bend, and you can see how that front edge of the ramp now lays nice with the edge of the cowling. However, on this side, since I'm putting the snorkel in and the filter is going to lay here, I probably won't put any kind of bend in this, because how are you going to get the filter in? Now the filter is very soft and very pliable. It will probably take shape to however I bend this, but I may not bend it. I'm not there yet. But for now, I want to fit that support piece, and that support piece supports this edge of this inlet ramp. It bolts to the engine underneath. That angle is what gets riveted to the ramp underneath to hold this in place. In order to figure out how to trim that piece to mount the angle to, you need to know where this ramp is actually going to sit. So in order to do that, here's what you do. You have your bottom cowling on. You take your ramp. I'm going to put my finger in here. You can see this gap here. I can close it just by pulling the ramp up. So if I put my finger in here, see, I can close that gap. So what I have done, I've pulled this up to close that gap, and then I've made a mark where the ramp meets the sidewall. So this is the side baffle here. The bottom ramp runs over and meets the side baffle here, right here. So if I pull up on this corner and close that gap, that brings the whole ramp up. So then if I hold it in that position and mark a line, now I have a reference line on my side baffle. So now I can take the cowling off, and then I can pull the ramp up until the edge of the ramp lines up with my reference line on the sidewall here. And then I can fit that piece that I'm working on to the ramp, and it will be at the correct angle. All right, I hope that makes sense. So that's what I'm going to do next, because I got to get this ramp secured in the right position before I final cut my snorkel up underneath it. So let me get this bracket made, and I'll talk to you guys later.